Greetings, greetings, greetings. You are now tuned into the vault. Trust Christian own nothing control everything. Just want to thank you for tuning in live, listening to replay. Always appreciate everybody that tunes in live, listens to replay. Always shout out to everybody. This is Trust Christian in the Vault, episode 306. Ownership equals liability. Definitely wanted to do this episode today. Appreciate everybody for tuning in live, listening to replay. Today's episode is the Vault 306. Ownership equals liability. Uh, this is more of a apropos conversation right now with the market in general. We get trustees that come into trustee training all the time that are looking to change their thought process from ownership to trusteeship to being in a position where they don't own anything but they control assets, where you give up ownership, and then you get people that that are still in the public, people that still are on the public side that have these thought processes towards things, and they they just keep thinking about owning something the entire time. They keep thinking about how they're gonna own something, when they're gonna own something, and that changes everything when an individual is looking to be in a more superior position. Appreciate Port Island, Louisiana for tuning in live, listening to replay. Shout out to Port Island, Louisiana. Appreciate you for tuning in live, listening to replay. But once again, ownership equals liability shares with you the thought process. The thought process of a person that every time they think about owning something, they have a liability. They are a liability. Something around is a liability. Why? Because anything you own, you can be taxed or sued for. There's double taxation. People can steal people's wealth. That's why you got to sue them. So when we talk about ownership, ownership is one of those things that uh, causes some damages in relationships. It causes damages in partnerships. Why? Because it exposes the parties involved. Why? Because ownership equals liability. So if you own something, you're exposing people to what? Liability. And this can be more of a repetitive subject matter, just because this is that type of subject matter. It is uh, focused on people understanding the difference between ownership and control. But let's just talk about ownership, which is liability. Ownership equals liability. Appreciate Callie for tuning in live, listening to replay. Shout out to Callie for tuning in live, listening to replay. Ownership equals liability. I mean, there's so many cases where a person is this or they're that, but let's just talk about the position ownership. Well, can a trust own something? Can a corporation own something? Yes, trust can own property. Corporations can own property. This is definitely not intended to be legal advice. We're talking about things that entrepreneurs talk about. These are the conversations that we have in the private sector about structure, about marketplace, about research, about all those different things. All of those different things. Ownership. Yeah. When you're surrounded by people that are focused on ownership, it can get you caught slipping. See, this is the challenge that trustees have, is that they still may associate with people that are not in trusteeship, and by doing so, you could potentially put yourself in a position where you're talking as if you're an owner. Why? Because everyone else around you are owners. It's not going to be easy to make a transition. It's not going to be easy to continue to handle yourself. Why? Because you're in a position where you're not getting the support that you need. The support system says own something, but until that support system around you says own nothing, control everything, trust Christian in the vault, until it says that, what position is it in? Ownership, liability. Ownership equals liability. What could it be? Down to your wedding ring? Yes. What could it be as big as? Uh, any type of large object. And if you ever have that, as far as the ownership position, you'll be in a position where you're liable for it. How can you avoid a position that people have been trained their whole life? The public school teaches this. It teaches to own something your entire life. Own your car, own your house, own everything. Right. And this is trust Christian in the vault. Own nothing, control everything. The complete opposite stance. Why? Because ownership equals liability. How do we get around that? By utilizing what are considered legal persons, entities. You know that they could own your life, so now they're liable for you. Do you know they have special needs trust for people that have children that have special needs? They have trust that are set up for children that have special needs. That can happen because entities are persons. So who has the liability for things? The person. The special needs trust has the liability for whatever needs the child may have, or X, Y, and Z. Ownership equal liability. But hold on, how does that change from you as opposed to the entity? You know it changes because it's a special needs trust, not yourself. There's a difference between an individual and that. Appreciate everybody for tuning in live, listening to replay. Shout out to all the Vault listeners that tune in live, listening to replay every single week. We wanted to talk about a story actually that we had this week that we were looking at. Uh, there's this lady we saw in the New York Post this past week. It's a model. Her name is Chantel Giacalone, and she has brain damage after eating a pretzel, and she is awarded $29.5 million. So if you own something, you can be sued for it. Well, the family of the model, who was left damaged after having a serious allergic reaction to a peanut butter pretzel, was awarded nearly $30 million by a Las Vegas jury. This young lady, his family was awarded $29.5 million because of the response ambulance service negligently treated her on the ride. Uh, because I guess they didn't have the traditional EpiPen. I think this is actually because she didn't have they didn't have the traditional EpiPen on them, which pretty much you're supposed to have an EpiPen, and they didn't think that she may have been having an allergic reaction. But nevertheless, they sued and won a case because they said that the care for her taken, to the hospital or whatever wasn't done. She's a quadriplegic, uh, has to be fed through a tube, and can communicate with her eyes. And she was awarded $29.9 million on her life. So you think about that special needs trust once again. Maybe she has that money in the special needs trust administering her life now, because of her parents. Maybe the money's not going to go to her parents. So they try to somebody else. I mean, she's a quadriplegic, so you're in this is a thing where people can still. So if it's something where it has been set up through the graces of the universe, where it could be possibly a special needs trust set up for that situation, and you can see how that would be beneficial because she doesn't own the money now. She may control it, but she doesn't own it. It could be in a special needs trust, and it's so interesting that we talked about that because that's the type of thought process we have over here in trusteeship, is making sure that your family's in the correct position. When you're passing along, wealth from one generation to the next. If you own something, you can't pass it along tax free. Why? Because there's death tax, there's estate tax, there's inheritance tax. They have these things, estate tax. They have all of those things. Sometimes they take it away in the government, sometimes they don't. But either way, the government wants its tax from wealth being administered from one generation to the next. It's an easy way to steal wealth from people. Simple as that. Ownership equals liability because they know if you own something, you have it in your name. So everybody's trained to have everything in their name their whole life. People have a hard time trying to do business outside of their name. And some people do that unknowingly. How's it working out for you, ladies and gentlemen? Building business. Ownership equals liability. This is just, it could be a short episode where it talks about the importance of what it is and how important it is for you to drill down and say, okay, trust Christian and vote. We got to make it a point to focus on own nothing, control everything. We got to focus on that. How do we do that? You always got to remember ownership equals liability. So you'll never start talking in the first person like I own. You let go of it. You start doing things at arm's length distance dealing. Everything's arm's length distance dealing. Everything is done at arm's length distance dealing. There is no question on going back on, who owns it and things of that nature. That's already established. The special needs trust is going to take care of things or whatever it is. Company. You got to know what owner is when you're looking at these corporations. Who's the owners? There's a difference between a manager managed and an owner managed. Manager manages manager managed. Owner managed is owner managed. These are the things that we talk about in the Vault and Trustee training. We got a trustee training workshop coming up on May 1st. Y'all already know half the room is full, ladies and gentlemen. We're just going to give y'all that much. Somebody said, I just joined Cornell's class. So excited. Appreciate you, Carlos Graves. We've made it a point to extend our network out to so many people so long, and we even talk about the trustee training class, the workshop coming up on May 1st, and we had someone ask recently, well, I'm gonna associate with Cornell and other people, but should I come to the class? Ladies and gentlemen, what do you mean? Are you gonna come to the class on May 1st? If you're a trustee, you network with other trustees. Period. Our trustees that go through our program want to connect. That's why we have the workshop. That's why we have workshops. Is because the trustees want to connect with each other. They do want to learn continuous information about trust foundations. They do want to connect with people that deal with the insurance such as Carrie. They do want to deal with people such as Cornell and learn how to become independently wealthy with Cornell's trading class as a trade, as a skill. People are trying to act like trading is not a skill. That's something you can learn. But you don't have to own the money that's coming through. You're just a trader. You work for the company. It's manager managed. It's not member managed. And you know the difference because you went through trustee training. So when you deal with people, other traders, when you deal with other people that are in the private, that deal with the family banking and things of that nature, you're right there with them. They understand the same language because they're in the room. They've been trained by Trust Christian in the Vault. They understand that. They understand the basics. They're able to say, hey, did Trust Christian go over this with you? Because he went over this with us. He went over this, and this is very important for us to understand these different things. So how would this work? How would that work? How would this work? At least they have a reference tool from trustee training to have conversations. Because when you get out in the big bad world in trusteeship, it doesn't seem like people are sinking. I mean, it doesn't seem like people are always swimming. Some of them are sinking. And they're singing because they have ownership mentality. People are saying, well, why would you want to be a trustee? Because you don't own anything. That's why you want to be a trustee. Let's repeat it again for the slow ones. Why do you want to be a trustee? Because you don't own anything. But oh, no. You're getting rid of liability, doofus. Oh, no. Let's say it again. For the person that asked the question, you're getting rid of liability. But somebody wants to ask these questions to trustees. People want to ask these questions to trustees, and trustees sometimes feel like fish out of water in the beginning because they haven't been through the training long enough. Somebody's asking them a stupid question, knowing good enough reason. The reason they got in trustee training program in the first place was to get rid of ownership liability. And then people on the outside are asking them a stupid question because it is a stupid question. They're asking you a question over and over again because they can't comprehend that you can get rid of such liability. People have been trained to think that you are to own everything. They are to think that even if you're a trustee, you are to own it. Just because you're a trustee doesn't mean you own it. Just because you're a manager doesn't mean you own it. Just because you work for the company doesn't mean you own it. Ownership equals liability. Oh, you have to pull down the salary. Says who? All the greats pull down $1. We have an episode on the vault. You guys can look for that episode. It's the vault, and it talks about how to have a salary of $1 and fly around on private jets and have private mansions. Oh, they didn't teach you that in school, did they? Yes, they did. There are people we know that are have master's degrees from well-known colleges, and that is what they are taught. They are taught to minimize their liability, to make sure that they have a corporation set up, and that they're just labeled the founder, that they are just labeled the startup manager or something. Because we're in a space where you're getting money from VCs, you're getting money from angels, you're getting money from hedge funds. They're giving you money. They're not going to let you own the company. If you didn't have $1 billion to start, they're not going to let you own the company with $1 billion of assets. You're going to be a manager. Hopefully, you do your job so they don't buy you out or fire you. If you came up with a really good idea, people get their ideas stole all the time because they were fronted money and they thought they owned the idea. And the next thing you know, because they signed a contract and somebody said, hey, let's sign a contract with this person, get them out of their position of ownership. Now we own it. And because you owned it in the beginning, you were liable. Instead of not owning it in the beginning, they couldn't have took it from you. They would have had to lease it from you. That's fine. Companies like leasing. They want to know that they get a return on their money. And leases, you're more apt to get a return on the money. Ownership is no true. It's a complete asset that's a liability. Why? Because they own it completely. They rather take fractional ownership. They rather take leasing ability. They don't need ownership. They just want fractionalized ownership. That's leasing. Temporary ownership. That's leasing. This is what the trustees get on the May 1st workshop. Not necessarily the more general talk, but more focused on laws and trusteeship. People say, why would I go to the trustee training workshop? Because the trustee training workshop allows trustees to get the private information that we talk about on this platform. Why are you in trusteeship? So you don't own anything, which equals a liability to your family. You're not a liability to your families. Now you are in the correct position. Whether it's the private family banking, whether that's the trusteeship, whether that's that being a trustee of a foundation, anything of that nature, you're not a liability to your family. So how do we get rid of that liability? You got to give it away. You got to make money giving it away. You got to get rid of ownership. Even in the situation where trustees are in foundations with endowments, they're making money giving it away because the foundation doesn't own the money anymore. They gave the money away as an endowment to a college. They gave an endowment to a library. They gave an endowment to a hospital. And they had an asset manager go out and grow the funds. They gave up ownership of the asset. See, it's never good to own the asset because now you're stuck with the liability. More of the actual burden of management fees of the asset itself. Whereas if you give the asset away, you're cash flow positive again because it's fractionalized ownership. It's leasing. You're leasing out something and getting a return. That's the type of conversation our trustees are going to be having on May 1st. Half the room's been sold out. So just know there's limited seating, ladies and gentlemen. Appreciate everybody for tuning in live, listening to replay. If you get a consultation, you can come to the workshop, ladies and gentlemen. Feel free to reach out right now to the vault, get a consultation. You can get your ticket to go to the workshop. We're going to go ahead and finish up this last little bit of these seats in the workshop. So once again, you get a consultation. you get a workshop. Y'all know what it is. Feel free to reach out Christian at trustchristian.com and y'all can look at getting a consultation. Once again, that's Christian at trustchristian.com. We did have an email issue about a week or so ago, so we know some people may have emailed and said, "Oh man, we haven't heard anything back." Just feel free to email us again, Christian at trustchristian.com, and we'll free to reach back out. Once again, you get a consultation, you come to the workshop. So we appreciate everybody tuning in live, listening to the replay. Once again, it's Christian at trustchristian.com to even find out, if you want to get the consultation or come to the workshop. But we look forward to seeing everybody that's actually already going to the workshop. The people know the vault. They've been listening to the vault for years. We've had workshops for years, ladies and gentlemen. With the COVID thing, that kind of just say, hey, we're not going to do any face-to-face workshops, but it's important for people to meet face-to-face and be able to trust other people that they can trust and trust. So we always appreciate everybody for tuning in live, listening to replay, all the trustees. uh, y'all definitely feel free to tune into the vault. This was ownership equals liability. That's what it's all about. You give up ownership, you give up liability. A lot of people, they say what liability is, that you get rid of a tax burden. You get rid of different types of burdens. These are burdens on your back because you own something. You can be sued out of assets. Sued. You can have assets frozen because of ownership. It's a simple move. But it's so complex for people in the public because they've been trained their whole life. Everybody says, I'm trying to make the transition, Trust Christian. I'm trying to make the transition. I'm trying to make the transition. I'm trying to make the transition. Everybody's trying to make the transition. But it's not just the change in even in the money. It's the change in the mindset. And people get stuck at the mindset. What's so challenging about it? Because you went to public school? Is this where we are? We're going to make excuses? You can't make excuses in the private sector. Ownership equals liability. As long as you own something, you're a liability to your family, to the trust, to the business, to your family. It's a liability. But people don't give this position up. Why? Because it's too easy to be a liability. It's hard to be an asset. It's challenging to grow assets. Why? Because that's where you got to think for yourself. That's where you got to think for your family. You got to make those hard decisions. It's never an easy time to make a hard decision. Do you get rid of this car? Do you get rid of this house? Do you get rid of this form of income? Maybe you have to switch businesses and pivot to another industry. Ownership equals liability. How many people were willing to even pivot? How many people were making the hard decisions? People say, oh, it's the mindset. It's the mindset. Well, do you have the mindset that you own something? Is that what it is? You have the mindset that you own things, that you still have things, that things are in your possession. And when things are in your possession, you own it, and then you're liable. So how do you get around that? You get rid of it. You give it away to an asset manager, another person. It's just that simple. Appreciate all the trustees for tuning in live, listening to replay. Ownership equals liability. We look forward to seeing you all at the May 1st workshop, Christian at trustchristian.com. Once again, Christian at trustchristian.com. Look forward to seeing you all. Enjoy the rest of your day. Look forward to hearing from you all. Peace.